Eu vou fazer o link do Forms para depois, né?
Bom dia, pessoal. Hoje a gente está aqui com a Basalt. Eles vão falar um pouquinho sobre o escritório deles e tudo mais. Antes disso, a gente vai começar com alguns avisos. Não esqueça de se inscrever aqui no link do Simpla e também colocar o seu nome completo no Forms. Não coloque apelidos. Perguntas podem ser feitas a qualquer momento e daí no final a gente vai fazer as perguntas para o palestrante. E é isso. Isa, se quiser anunciar, pode anunciar.
So, Crow, you can start.
Thank you. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Hrólfur and I'm from Basalt Architects in Iceland. Just before we start, I want to give a little introduction to the company. It was founded in 2009 by Sigríður Sigþórsdóttir, who had been working previously with other companies before she founded her own in 2009. And we work on many different kinds of scales and programs, but what we are perhaps best known for is our geothermal bathing architecture, which we have been fortunate enough to develop all over the country in Iceland. And this is what we are going to focus on mainly today. It's not a very big company, I say maybe medium size in Iceland. We are about 17 people, mostly architects, but also constructing architects and interior designers. So I'm going to share now a presentation. And let me know if you see everything properly. Is this okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to look mainly at our geothermal projects in Iceland, and they are really all over the country. And I think it's important to give a little background into Iceland and our bathing culture. Iceland is a volcanic island, so we have all of our water, or 98% of it, is geothermally heated, all of our hot water. And actually, the whole country, all the houses and everything is heated with renewable geothermal water and steam. So you can imagine that with the state of the world at the moment, an energy crisis here and there, we are quite happy to be independent from gas and coal and other unsustainable sources of energy. But here you see a map of Iceland, and more or less every little town in Iceland, even if there's only like 100 people living there, have their own geothermally heated pool. And if you look at Italy, for example, like the common spaces there would be the piazzas all over all the little towns and cities. But the equivalent in Iceland is probably our geothermal swimming pools, where people come together and meet and talk, swim, exercise, do different things. So we have been fortunate enough, like I said, to work on these geothermal projects in many places all over the country. Only one of our projects is an actual like a public swimming pool. You see all these gray dots, which are more or less that. But then mostly we've been working on spas, so a little bit higher end bathing places. And I'm just gonna, touch on these blue dots today, basically. So I said Iceland was a volcanic island, and I don't know how much you know about the country, but it's split in two. You see these orange, red, and yellow spots. So one half of the country belongs to the North American tectonic plate and the other to the Eurasian plate. And it's slowly pulling the country apart. So we always have volcanic activity especially across this belt that goes across the country. And with that volcanic activity, there's a lot of heat and hot water. So this is a recent picture. You'll excuse my runny nose, but it was in the middle of the night in -15 degrees. And this was just last year. So we had a volcanic eruption. This is very close to the Blue Lagoon, actually. We were quite nervous that actually the ensuing eruption could happen anywhere. It could happen actually in our project underneath it, but luckily it didn't. But this really gives you an appreciation, about how the country is formed, and you're going to look at the landscape a little bit differently after you've seen it being formed. So in 2017, we opened this museum. It's a lava center in the south of Iceland, and this is an exhibition/museum that is centered around the volcanology of Iceland. And so this is one of those chambers. This is the highest part of the building. The building is designed around the exhibition. And in that part, we have a scale model of what's happening underneath the country. So this is what is called a mantle plume. So essentially molten lava tongue that reaches from the core of the planet to the top where Iceland is formed. And Iceland is basically made out of this mantle plume. And so, like I said, this is to scale. This is the size of the country on top of that plume. And when people come into this room, sometimes you can just see the look of horror on their faces as they realize that, all of this is underneath. But at the same time, this is what gives us the privilege of the geothermal water all over the country. So what combines many of these projects, these geothermal projects, is that they are kind of born out of a happy accident, so to speak. Most of the water that we're using for these geothermal baths is not purposefully drilled, to make a bath. Usually it's the result of something else. So people were drilling for water to heat the houses and would come across, a main that's too salty or just otherwise unfit for the original intended use. But a lot of the cases, they're a good fit to create a bath. So the baths are in some cases determined by what you find by accident and couldn't use for anything else. And the Blue Lagoon is actually a pretty fantastic example of this. So now you see a picture of the lava field. This is the Blue Lagoon before we started the latest phase, which is the retreat at the Blue Lagoon. And you can see how close it is to the power plant. So this is a power plant that drills for the water. It comes from 2 kilometers below the ground and is a mix of fresh and seawater. So they produce or run it through the factory to create heat and electricity. And then the leftover water after the production is channeled and let cool down a bit, and then let loose here, but also channeled in pipes to the lagoon. So it's essentially a byproduct of energy production. And there didn't used to be any water here on the surface. It's just runover water from factory. And in fact, back in the day when they started bathing in this water, it was here, right in the shadow of the factory itself. And this is what it used to look like in the heydays of the Blue Lagoon. But then people discovered that this water had a lot of healing properties and decided to make something more of it. So a holistic design process was started to find a new location, new roads, and a new ideology of how you could use this water, this runoff water from the factory. So it was a pioneering project in tourism in Iceland. Back then, in the mid-90s, there was relatively no tourism here, or very little. And these were the biggest, most grandiose plans that anybody had come up with for the tourist industry in Iceland. and many skeptics who said this was too big, it's going to fail, and you know, it just was too new. But luckily, when it opened, it was already too small. There had been a lot of development in the tourist sector. So as soon as it opened, people started, you know, looking into the future. What is the next thing we're going to do here? So early on in 2003, 2002, even earlier, people started looking to the end. So they planned ahead to the future. And even the latest phase, which is the retreat, which I'm going to show you, was already planned 20 years ahead as part of a kind of grander scheme. And this is from inside the first phase of the Blue Lagoon. I'm going to go back a couple of slides to show you that the site was selected at the edge of two running lava flows. So you see this edge that I'm pointing to here, which is kind of sharp edge, which holds the water in place, but then it's taken into the building and continued all the way to the entrance, and you have this long walking path where the journey begins. So the journey is something we always try to think about, the guest's journey through our projects, and it doesn't necessarily start when you enter the door. It starts when you enter the area. So right from the parking lot, you're in this quite narrow walking path, which you see here. So that's where the journey begins in the lava. Then you're guided by this wall through the building, and this wall meets you again in the end. That's just the wall from the site work that's taken into the building. So this was the cue from which we started the retreat. So this was the latest extension before that, and we thought we're going to continue with this ideology of really just taking the environment into the building and trying to blur the lines between what is a building and what is landscape. And you'll see that a bit when we move forward. So also, you know, taking over the lagoon up to the building, we try to focus on simple things in our project, you know, the essence of each place. So in the case of the Blue Lagoon, it's really three things. It's the blue water, which is unique in the world, with this particular composition. And then it's the lava field and the moss that grows on top of the lava. So these three things should be part of you know, every space in the building. This is from the Basilica Hotel, which is next door, another facility that they run, which is here. And there we were also experimenting with taking elements from the nature in. So we were cutting glass to follow the cliff, so it literally comes into the building. And so now we move onto the latest phase. So you saw before, this is where we ended in the previous phases of the Blue Lagoon, and the retreat is essentially two parts connected by the lobby. So it's this part, which is the spa, that's built very much into the ground and always gets lower and lower and lower until it's connected to the existing lagoon. And then we have the hotel part, which is two wings, one to the south and one to the west. At the end of the wings, we have suites and then rooms in between. And this is the lobby connecting the two programs. So now we take a look at a three-dimensional drawing of it, where we take the roof off. You can see a little bit the spaces inside. So you'll see that the spa is arranged like a spine that gradually steps down into the landscape. And off that spine, we have all of these different rooms, each for its own purpose. So we have relaxation rooms, saunas, steam rooms, indoor pools, treatment rooms, and you know, so it's all these different programs of the spine as you get lower and lower. And then here, in the lowest part of the spa proper, are three interconnected chambers, each set a little bit lower into the ground, so they're like a recessed room. And each one of those is dedicated to one of the active ingredients in the water. So the water is composed of silica, blue-green algae, which is unique in the world over there, and minerals and salt. So this is what makes the water there so good for your body. And the Blue Lagoon has, from the beginning, developed their own like skincare line. So when you're in these interconnected chamber, you go through this kind of ritual of self-applying these materials. So each chamber is dedicated to one material in the water. So here we have the silica chamber, the minerals, and the algae chamber. And you have a bath master that kind of takes you through all of this. And once you're done, you can enter the water, and the thought is that you're kind of reborn into the water. So in the beginning, we have this very light concrete. Everything is quite vicious and airy. Oh, sorry. And then once you go down, it gets a little bit darker. The concrete gets darker until you're here in the bottom. It's black concrete. Everything to really try to match the lava walls of the site work. I'll show you this a little bit better. So this is when we're starting. It's a bit old picture. It was a long project. It took from 2011 when we started the design process, and it was completed in 2018. But what was really interesting about this project is that we got to improvise a bit. So as you can imagine, when you're working into an environment like this, which is naturally like this, you don't really want to touch anything. So the idea has always been in the Blue Lagoon to touch as little as possible. So in the beginning, we really tried to read the land, whatever the cracks and fissures in the surface would tell us. And then we would draw out the program according to the client's wishes of what should be included. And then we actually drew that program onto the ground, one-to-one with a string. Also took care to really look at what the view is like. This is Hartmann, property manager from the retreat. So this is looking at the view from the top floor of the hotel as it would actually be. I'm trying to set the building height-wise into the ground. So this is when we were stringing out the first layout of the building. So if we found out that the string was not entirely appropriate, or that we wanted to include some particular bit of the lava field, then we got to change it. And then after the earthwork started, the same approach was kept, so that if we found something, once the ground was opened, we were able to say to the contractor, stop, this is an interesting feature, we would like to include it in the design, and then we redraw or adapt the building to whatever we found. So essentially the spa part of the Blue Lagoon was redrawn maybe 2 or 3 times, at least partially. So this way we really try to work with the landscape and what it gives us. And these lines that we strung out on the field also remained, so that it became a boundary for the contractor once he started. So he could not go a step outside of this line. And I believe in the contract there was a fine if you did that. And so they really also had to adapt this kind of respectful view of the landscape and the project, which then everybody shared, the designers and constructors and the guys at the Blue Lagoon themselves. So we found all kinds of things in the earthwork. Some of these cliffs would become the final interior of the building. And this is what happens also when you cut through the lava field where you saw the water. So this is the silica deposits that collect on the bottom where the blue water is. And they probably need to dig this out before the water surface rises too much. But you can see what part of what the water is composed of, and it seeps into the ground quite deep down. And then this is another part. This is the deepest part of the building, where we found that once we broke through the heavy basalt rock on top, which you see is the gray part here, we found this very loose kind of crumbling pumice stone, And probably it's underneath the whole area, or at least big parts of it. So I remember that day we had to say stop again. Do we want to do something with this? And we called in the geologist from the engineering company. He was walking through that place through this narrow walking path and talking to somebody. And I remember when he saw this, that his face just turned white when he realized, perhaps we're quite close to this in many parts of the building. So there's not a really very solid grounding. But after some inspection, he became comfortable with it. And I'll show you a little bit later what we then decided to do with this particular moment in the building. So here is some pictures from the earthwork. And mind you that Iceland is an earthquake area, more or less the whole country, not least this part of the country, which is the Reykjanes Peninsula, where the Blue Lagoon is situated. So all the building has to be designed for pretty intense earthquakes, which was an interesting conversation with the engineers, as we always try to, edge the roof, closer to the edge of these cliffs, so that it doesn't have to, extend very far out, and you really see the intersection of walls and cliffs. So this is from the groundwork, and some of these became the interior walls. You can see these red, orange, sometimes purple hues in the rock, which is iron deposits, and they then became part of the interior, which is quite nice in some cases. So all the concrete, more or less, in the spa at least, had to be hand cut. So the formwork to follow the outlines of the cliffs that just became part of the interior. So you can imagine all the hand labor on behalf of the contractor, who cried sometimes, but in the end, I think he was pretty happy with the result of his labor. So here you see how the spa part is really quite set into the ground. When you have a difference in the roof, and also the floor is going down. So always further into the ground, getting darker and darker. This is how the hotel wings are set into the lava. So the hotel, as you noticed, is also surrounded by water, so kind of like a castle in a moat. And part of the reason why we did that is to increase like the security feeling of guests, because nobody can really approach the rooms, but also coming back to the point that we wanted the lava and the moss and the water to be part of every room inside the building, so that you experience it wherever you are in the building. We also tried to use a lot of the materials from the site work, so some of it became interiors, reception desks, breakfast tables, even the floor is also infused with lava, so it's a terrazzo floor with lava filling material. Cut some of the lava into these tile work for different places, for emphasis around fireplaces and other things. We made tables out of also stone from the site work. Here you can see one of the suites, so that the outside really becomes part of being inside. It's vistas of the moss and the lava. And it's the spa, it's quite set into the ground, as you can see. And many places we're piercing the building, even through the windows again, like I showed you earlier in another project where the Blue Lagoon did it. And then also in the spa, we actually take the water through the building in a couple of places. So, like I said earlier, trying to kind of blur the boundaries between what is a building and what is landscape. This is the steam room in the back, built into a cave. And you'll really see the presence of the lava in some selected viewpoints. So here's an example how it comes into the building. So what's interesting is that when it's raining outside, obviously this cliff is not going to hold the rain. It's porous, so the water just comes through it. But we designed it, we designed deliberately a leaky building so that the guest inside can really experience what kind of weather is also. If it's raining, it's also raining inside the building. And the water is just channeled into these gutters on the floor and then out the right way. So it's quite an experience when it's raining. This is what we did with that lowest part where you saw the red crumbling pumice stone underneath the heavy cliffs. So here to the left, you'll see something that is the elevator core down to that lowest part, connecting the kitchens on the top floor and the basement. So we decided to make this hall a lot bigger and use it as a wine cellar. So you can go directly from the restaurant on the top floor down to this wine tasting area. And we deliberately pulled the floor plates away from the cliff so that when you stand on the edge, you can see the intersection of the heavy and loose, especially lit up, and even the sound is coming from underneath the floor plate a little bit, quite dramatic, as if you're very deep in the ground, hearing the rumblings of the earth, essentially. So this is quite, quite an experience for people when they come down and are able to see these geological features of the building with their own eyes. Here is a picture from the spa, the fire room. So you see how the cliff comes into the building, comes into the room. The new lagoon around the retreat is quite deep, which is a contrast with the previous lagoon, which has these quite open vistas towards the power plant and the mountain behind. This is in the low part of the spa, so you see these hanging chairs, relaxation chairs. They are actually made from like basalt threads that are extracted from basalt rock. And you'll see here in the back there's a screen, and this is a repeated element in different parts of the building. You'll see an example here of some of the drawings that we did for those. So they're inspired by what happens when you cut through a piece of lava rock. You'll see all these air holes that have been trapped since the creation of the stone itself. And it's a quite intricate pattern. If you really take a close look at it, you'll see that it's directional as well, depending on in which way the lava flow was flowing at the time. So what we did is use this as an inspiration to create these screens, referencing what's happening in the nature around, and we programmed in this directionality, and actually no two holes in this whole assembly are the same. It's a grasshopper program, and that becomes the result on the facade. It works as sunscreens, but it's also a kind of unifying elements for the different masses of the facade, which ties the building quite nicely together. And what also happens is, on sunny days, you get a really, dramatic effect when the sun bounces off the surface of the water and then back through the screens and onto the ceiling. So you get this shimmering water that's also pierced by the screens on the outside. So revoking this process of the holes being created in the lava from the beginning. Here you can see in the lobby how it looks like also from the inside. And this is going down into the deepest part of the spa. And then I'm gonna just show you a quick video of the project. This is the lobby connecting the spa and the hotel. You'll notice in the lobby maybe that there's an exhibition about Icelandic ceramics from the, I believe it's 60s, where people were experimenting with infusing lava into the ceramics. It was quite hot at the time, but then it kind of fell out of fashion. and then now we're displaying this old collection again in an appropriate setting, which is here. And we did a lot of custom things in this project. One of those things is the light that you're seeing in the ceiling. So it's specially made by Ikuchimi and recessed behind the cloth ceiling. Because one of the things we are really concerned about in all of our projects is acoustics and lighting, which is incredibly important aspects of our project. So now I'm gonna jump a little bit to the north of the country. It is also a project that was completed in 2018. It's in Húsavík, in the northeast of the country, really. It belongs to that section. And it's a small town, historically a fishing town, but more tourism lately. And some people call it the whale watching capital of Iceland. I have a lot of whale watching tours coming from the harbor. And it's a project that we've been working on for a while, since 2010. It's been developing, and it had been developing since then. And in every iteration that we did, we tried to kind of get as close to the edge of the cliff as we were allowed, and people felt comfortable with. So over time, we moved there. But this is the beginnings of this. So like I said earlier, many of these projects are born out of kind of these happy accidents. So they had been drilling for water for the municipality for heating, and they came upon this water main, which is salty water, so it's heated ocean water. And some locals put up this very rough bathing facility where they would just channel this water through a hose into these old cheese mixing containers, and this is where it all started. People started going there and enjoying this water, which also has these healing properties. It's good for your skin. So then people got the idea to develop this further, and that's when they had approached us. And we were helping them from the beginning, making proposals for fundraising and being at hand. So there's another defining feature out there at the edge of the cliff, which is this old lighthouse from the 60s. It had become quite dilapidated. So as part of the project, we both moved to the edge of the cliff, but also closer to this lighthouse. We felt it was a nice thing to associate with, a kind of landmark for the area. And one of the things that was done simultaneously to the construction of the building was to redo or refurbish this lighthouse. So now you'll see the result, how it came out. It's quite set into the ground so that when you approach it from the parking lot, you can see over the building. So one of the defining features of being here is the view over Skjálfandi Bay, which is the place where you have all the whales, coming out of the ocean. And in the background there is Kinnafjall, which is sometimes called the home of the Arctic fox. It's quite remote, it's hard to get there, and it is a really nice mountain range in the background. This waterfall is new, because it's important to say that in these projects, the water continuously runs through the pools. It's not cleaned. It's not chlorine or any kind of cleaning agents. And this is also really quite an important factor in experiencing these bathing places. So this is essentially what happens to the water after it's been run through the pools and after it's been used also partially to heat the walking paths to the building. So here you see how it's set into the ground, the shape of the buildings, it's not totally dissimilar to the cliff outside, the water, down there, and this veranda a little bit like the ledges in the landscape. So again, you really don't have to go so far for inspiration. And then the concrete texture of the building is referencing a bit the rough concrete and the cliff faces outside. Here you approach the building and you really see over the top of it to the horizon. Here's a rendering from the inside. We didn't actually totally finish the building until just this summer, so we still have to photograph it a little bit. But that's soon. This is from the poolside area. You really see this infinity edge, which we have done in some of our projects, especially where you have the opportunity of blending different water surfaces. So it kind of seems like it's running into the ocean and combining with that surface. You'll see the shape of the pool. That's one of the purposes, is to kind of make a more intimate scale. And it's also a bit of a reference to the old Icelandic way of building these geothermal hot pots, where you can be together as a group, not in a big body of water, but each group can kind of occupy their own little space in the pool. So here you can see the view in the background, the ocean. In winter, we have this Kinnarfjall I told you about, the lighthouse in the background. And then right from the beginning, we had, intended to have this infinity edge, because there's a very special moment that happens in the middle of summer at this place, because we're so far north, almost to the Arctic Circle. So during a couple of days in summer, the sun is just about to set on the surface of the ocean, but then it doesn't go below the horizon, it just starts a new day. So they try to keep the facilities open for that particular moment. And that's particularly beautiful when the surface of the water in the pool and the surface of the ocean come together as one. And I'm going to show you just a little video here. So this is what it looks like in winter. I'm sure this is quite foreign to Brazilians. I'm not used to this weather. All right. So jumping again, back to the other side of the country. This is a small project that was also completed in 2018. I'm saying we completed quite a bit in that year. So that's Guðlaug, and it's in Akranes, which is a small town about 45 minutes away from Reykjavik, so quite close. And also this town historically has a connection to seafaring and fishing. And the project is born out of a memorial fund that a couple who lived in the town had left. The memorial fund was mostly for applications to go to sea, so to learn to be a sailorman or learn how to swim or anything that had to do with going out to the ocean. And then less and less application always came to that fund, so they decided to dismantle it and use the remaining funds to found this pool for the citizens of the community. And all the requirements that we were given is that it had to be by this particular beach, which is called Langisandur, and is part of that town. And opposite to Brazil, we have very few usable beaches in Iceland, and this is probably the only one that's this big a part of the town itself, really located in the middle of the town. It has a kind of yellow hue to it, which is quite rare in Iceland. So our project was to design a pool somewhere on Langisandur, and we had only a specific amount of water that we could use that determined the size of the project. But other than that, it was totally open. So the first time we came there, and I'm gonna say this probably a few times today, we're trying to focus on what's simple, the simple elements, and what is special about each place. So we came there after there had been a storm the night before, and always after these storms, you have these rocks scattered on the beach. And then the tide comes in and out, and what happens is that little depressions form around heavy objects on the beach. So a little pool gets created around all of these rocks. And we asked ourselves, so what is a pool here? And so this was a simple enough inspiration for us. It's probably, maybe it's this. So we used it as like a conceptual starting point, and developed the pool itself. So we located here in the center of the beach. So there's a walking path connecting two sides of town, and this is directly in the middle. It's a quite popular path to run and walk. This is the sports area of the town, so it's also connected to that kind of leisure activity, swimming pools, sports halls. These are soccer fields out here. And then we have a stadium for the soccer field, which shelters the baths from the cold northern winds. They're quite hard over there. So sometimes, like you saw before, the beach is this wide open space, but sometimes it's like this. And the difference between low and high tide is more than 4 meters, excluding what happens in storms when you get a higher surface in the ocean. So what we also wanted the project to do is enable people to enjoy being there, whatever the situation was, if it's a beach or if it's like this. And this is why we place it in the middle of the rock barrier. So whatever the weather is, you can enjoy the facilities. This is again a picture what shows what happens after the storm. And then a really kind of simple concept to start from. So we did a 3-tier structure. So in the middle and in the middle of the rock garden is the main pool, and it's centered around this rock in the middle that we specially selected from here and it's shaped like a chaise longue. So the people who know how to sit in it, and it's a quite particular shape. And then we have a lower pool, which is very shallow, and the water from the higher one runs into that one. And I'll explain a little bit the reason why we did that also. And then on the top, we have this viewing platform, which is kind of like standing in a boat, looking out to the ocean, referencing the seafaring history of the town. Again, always the same kind of shape repeated. And this structure was more or less cast off-site, except the base. And all the construction obviously had to be timed according to the tides. So it was quite a difficult construction, complicated construction. So here we see how the ocean is. This is 0. So this is at its highest point, but really once you have the wind and other aspects in the environment, it can be even higher than the lowest one. So sometimes this is completely ocean, or more or less, but it's always a kind of mix between slightly colder water and the water from above. And the reason, one of the reasons why we did this is there's a big sea swimming community in Akranes, and they go to the ocean no matter what time of year it is, even in January and February when it's the coldest months in Iceland. Then the ocean is about 3 to 4 degrees warm, which is quite cold. This one is about 40 or 39. So it can be quite a shock to the body to go between this very cold water and the hot water. But this one is always, slightly colder. So you can step down in heat between the ocean and the main pool. So these are some of the construction drawings we needed to make. And I don't think anybody fully understands them. More like paintings rather than drawings. And we ended up modeling all of this in 3D, and that was what people used to construct it. But I always like to show them because I find them, quite beautiful. As a kind of hand craftsmanship of architectural drawing. And this is then the final result. You see the top, which is actually missing its center stone. It's supposed to be a water fountain integrated into a stone. But patience, we'll wait for it. It'll come. And then some of the pictures. And what's happened with this project is that it really has. I think the people of the town are quite fond of it. They use it a lot. But what it's also done is attract people from Reykjavik, and now more increasingly people from abroad as well. So you get this nice mix of community versus international guests. So you have the influence of all the world, but they're also meeting locals there. And this also happens in GeoC, the one I showed you before, and in some of our other projects. So it's a nice kind of cultural mix that happens. And this project is open. It's more or less free. I think it costs like $3 to enter or something like that. If you feel like paying, that is. And some more pictures from this. This is the Sea Swimming Club on the first day when it opened. So they were the first ones to try it. Get these quite beautiful sunsets there as well. On clear days, you can see Reykjavik skyline here in the background, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean. And I'll show you a little video of this as well. So it's funny, the name Guðlaug. So one of the lady from the Memorial Fund who owned the Memorial Fund, her name was Guðlaug. So it's named out of respect for her, but it also means God's pool. Not that we're particularly religious, but if you look at God as a unifying natural element, this is what we found to be a pool in this place, in this natural setting. So sometimes it's like this from the lower half, and then sometimes like this. Whatever the case is, it's always quite nice to be there, and I actually quite like it like this because you can really feel the power of the ocean underneath your feet. And then if you're brave enough, you can stay downstairs. So jumping again, we're always jumping across the country. So now to the east, this is a project that opened in 2019, close to Egilsstaðir in Iceland. And it's located by this lake, and the lake is called Urriðavatn. And Icelanders, I don't know if you know this, we are storytellers. We believe in elves, and we believe in monsters, and we've all these, super natural creatures. And this is what we had to do back in the day when we couldn't explain natural phenomena. We had to make up stories to explain them. And then a lot of these elves and monsters and things were created as the explanation for things we couldn't explain. So the story goes that in this water there was a serpent, a big serpent called Tuska, and some believed it's a relative of another one that lives in a river next, quite close to this, and some believe it's actually the same one swimming between the two bodies of water through an underground tunnel. And the reason why people believe there was a monster in this lake is that even in winter, when everything was frozen, you would have these spots that were still thawed, and they were in different places on the lake. They could be on one end or the other and have different shapes. And so they thought this serpent was breaking a hole in the surface to be able to breathe. But as people would later learn, it was a geothermal source of water at the bottom of the lake. And as it happens, this is the only certified drinkable geothermal water that we have in Iceland. So it's so clean, you can even drink it hot from the ground. And it's about 72 degrees Celsius when it comes up, and it is used for heating the town, this town and the next actually, and this area. But we're also using the water as a big element of experiencing these baths, both of water to be in, but also for the catering aspect of this project. So you can, for instance, run your own tea directly from this water source. So it's all about the water, and it's all about, emphasizing what is special about this location again, and connecting back to historic elements like the tale of the monster. So what we did is we developed the pool scheme. So one is in land, quite close to the buildings where you enter into the water, but then you can also go out, and we have these two pools on the water itself. They are floating because the level of the water can increase by a meter and decrease. So this way we always have the same relationship between the surface of the water in these floating pools and the water around it. So you can be in this hot water and just reach out to the cold water, and you'll see on this picture that a lot of people are actually then jumping into the lake, which is unexpected. We expected it to happen, but not nearly as much as it has. So there's a nice relationship of going directly into the hot water between the lake. It doesn't get quite as cold as the ocean, but still pretty cold. And what we're doing here also is integrating the building into the landscape. A part of our philosophy when we're doing these places in these natural settings is that the architecture is really a platform to enjoy what's already there. It's not the main event, the architecture itself, but it's really much kind of set into the environment in which it is. And in this project, we are using timber from a nearby forest to clad the building, and then we're also revoking it inside the building, which I'll show you a little bit more, because forests, other than in Brazil, are quite rare in Iceland. Only about 3% of the country is covered with forests. So if you have the opportunity to work with it as a design element, you take it, and we took it. So these are views from the floating pools, and again, we're using this effect of the water bodies coming together, this infinity edge. There's a picture that shows how it's set into the ground. And of course, we have Aurora Borealis over here, which is quite visible many times from there. So this is a picture of that forest in the vicinity. It's not really good for, as lumber forest, but they've started to graze it and cut it down. So we had some availability of these trunks already. So we wanted to kind of remake this picture in the building. So what we did is incorporate it in the precast concrete elements that run through the main hall when you enter. And there you can kind of see the imprint of the trunks in the concrete. And then we had this delay agent in the concrete formwork. So you can also see the filling material in the concrete itself, which is brought from Jökulsár Gljúfur, which is a canyon close by. So we're kind of referencing the materiality of the vicinity in the forest and the kind of dramatic canyons around. And it meets the water in some cases. It meets the roof, which is clad from timber from the same forest. The interiors also made from the same lumber. And we had a special beer made out of this geothermal water for this particular place. And here you can see like the tea machine where you can run water directly from the borehole to make your tea. And then we have some winter pictures here. So this is what happens again, you know, when you remembering the history of the monster. So now the people are the monsters. We're kind of floating in the middle of these unthawed places on the lake, and everything else is frozen. So we're, you know, remembering the old tale of the monster by keeping parts of the surface unfrozen. And just a little video to explain this. So I'm sorry, it's a little bit jumpy, but should show it. All right, I'm going to do one more. That's the latest one that had opened, and then I'm going to just briefly touch a couple of them very shortly, and then we'll have a little time for questions. So this project, jumping back to the north, was opened just this May, and it's also situated in this forest, which became quite the focus point of the project. Because now we're building the bathing facilities directly into a hillside, but also into the forest of the hillside. So this is the site before we started. There was this parking lot, and the building is then set into this forest that is not so old. It's about 70 or 80 years old. It's a planted forest. And this is an overall view rendering of the facilities. So it's essentially split into two. It's the front half, which is made out of cross-laminated timber units. So the solid timber, a quite sustainable way of building. And we're keeping really the textures and all and inside, so that when you're in that part of the building, which is the reception, the restaurant, and people and places where people stay for a little bit longer, you'll feel the connection between the textures of the interior and the forest around the project. Then we have the back of the house, which is very integrated into the hillside itself, made out of precast concrete units. And that's the changing rooms and the parts of the building that is not very appropriate to have the CLT because of water and moisture. And you'll see here in the facade of the building that is going in and out a lot. So you can probably think of it as like a zipper between building and natural elements. So every time we make these depressions into the facade, we try to introduce natural elements to kind of zip the building with the landscape. even cutting out of the middle to introduce vegetation, the same as in the forest around. And to some extent, we try to, keep trees in the surrounding and touch as little of the vegetation as we could in the construction. And the third part, I guess you could say, is this sauna. That's this individual building by the lagoon. So it's quite set into the landscape. And once you enter, you can see, how the nature and the buildings start to come together. We're cutting out of the roof pieces to introduce trees. This one is a little bit like a Christmas tree at the moment, but it's inside this cutout in the middle of the building. But it'll grow about 50, 60 centimeters a year and slowly fill this up and start to come out of the building. You can see also here the CLT texture, both in the ceiling and the walls.
Live streaming is on.
All right, we're back. Yeah, so you
Yes.
can see how the CLT texture is visible from the inside and how the windows kind of come into the building and really opens up to the surroundings so that the forest becomes, a part of the interior. And this is from the pool. We also introduce trees from the forest into the body of water itself. And now we have fall here in Iceland, so it's going to be interesting to experience how the leaves will start to fall off the trees and be part of the experience of being in the pool itself among the leaves. So that'll be interesting. And you'll see this cladding is quite, has these narrow strips. And at the edge of it, you'll see a kind of profiling that we're trying to talk about the edge of a forest. When you see it from far away, it's usually the straight line, but with these treetops and serrating the edge a bit. So this timber cladding is cut-offs from timber production. So we're trying to use it as sustainably as we could. So it's leftover timber, and we had it cut at 45 degrees angle and then arranged in this pattern to echo the edge of a forest. And here you can see a picture from behind the upper part of the pool to the sunset in the west. This is from the sauna building you saw before. This big panoramic window over the town of Akureyri in the background and the ocean and forest around. So this is from the construction when we were reintroducing some of the trees to the site. And they had to specifically cut the root system to fit into this shape. But luckily it worked out. This tree is quite healthy and is doing well now. So this is what we did in the back. You remember I said it was two parts. So one is quite integrated into the hillside. So we take the cliff into the building, and there we have a lot of cold water in the hillside behind. So it's coming in on different places in the cliff. So you can see it probably here to the left. The wall is always crying water, and we use the light to emphasize these particular places where the water is coming in. And here you see at the end of that corridor, the changing rooms are here, but here is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's cut into the cliff itself, so it continues to the outside, again kind of blurring the boundary between what's inside and what is outside. And then I'm just quickly going to run through some projects that are on the drawing table at the moment, but not finished. So this is the mountain paths in Þjórsárdalur Valley, a bit in the interior of the country. So it's actually a very interesting location because it's on the edge of the highlands and the lowlands. So the building is integrated into this mountain. It's called the revamped, which essentially belongs to the highlands, geologically speaking, but looks over the lowlands. So it's a kind of, we're straddling the edge of the two. and it's a fragile environment, so we wanted the impact of the building to be as little as possible. So we're setting it into the side of the mountain. This is very much a work in progress still. So the first part is the hotel reception and the bathing facilities, changing rooms down here, and then the bath itself. And then we have hotel rooms extending to the east. Another project that is under construction at the moment is right here in the middle of the country, which is a very, very challenging construction site. It can only work there for a very limited amount of time for each season. Maybe if you're lucky, about 5 months of construction, then you have to move inside. And more or less all the people of Iceland live on the periphery by the coast. So the center of the country is uninhabitable, essentially. So this was a very much a challenge, and it's a highland center in the middle of the country that will really, I think, in our view and others, kind of change the game in the tourist industry, opening up into the highlands, something that people want to run year round when we have the infrastructure that's being put in place. So it's a number of buildings, although it's like a service building, a hotel, and then smaller units that you can rent out individually, and a tent site that will be open in the summer. And then now also under construction is here in the northeast of the country, which is the earth baths. They are currently in operation, but we are renewing it. So redoing the building, constructing a new one, and after the completion, we will tear down the existing ones. And again, this water is kind of like the Blue Lagoon, and although not the same composition, but this kind of blue geothermal water that is runoff water from a power plant, similar as happens in the Blue Lagoon. And over there is a really kind of interesting geological area. Wherever you put down a shovel or open the ground, you get this heat coming up everywhere, wherever you do it. So the surface heat there, when you break it, is about 33 degrees Celsius. So we had to take all kinds of precautions in the building to minimize the effect of this heat in the ground. That's kind of rough image of what it's going to be. Yeah, I think that's it for me. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. First one is, how do you ensure that the rocks that are present inside the environments are stable? Do they produce some small sediment through erosion as well?
It is a little bit different depending on the project. So essentially, what you saw in the Blue Lagoon, for instance, those rocks are really quite stable. And it was a conversation with the engineers throughout the process. We always encouraged them to go a little bit closer to the edge while they wanted to be, safer and be further away with their structure from the edge of the cliffs. But as it has turned out, it's fine. Since the construction of the Blue Lagoon, we have had some severe earthquakes out there in that area, actually almost underneath the building as the source point, but nothing has really happened except perhaps in the lagoon itself. We had a few rocks coming down from the edge, but no accidents, and we've taken safety precautions because of that. But other than this, it's totally fine. But in other projects, you have to kind of secure the rocks a bit more. So what you can do is drill a steel rod into the cliffs, glue it into the cliffs essentially, quite deep, and that holds the different layers of the rock together. But also during the earthwork, you just have to take care that you're, getting rid of the loose material, the big rocks that potentially can fall. And you can in some cases just see it on the surface. If there's a crack that you need to loosen it.
Okay, cool. Next one is, I was wondering what you have to keep in mind when designing a building that is so close to the sea. How do you account for the eroding power of the waves plus the salinity of the water?
Yeah, like that probably applies especially to Guðlaug, which is on the beach in the rock garden. And the materials we use there, the concrete for that project, for instance, is marine grade concrete. So essentially the same concrete that you would use when you're building piers, or if you take a look at the Second World War, where you have these pill boxes that they were called, these gun shelters along the beach of Normandy. You know, they're all built to withstand these powers of the ocean. But that being said, I mean, it was a pretty bold approach in that project, and we had a lot of skeptics, especially people from the town who thought we were totally crazy and this would never work. But thankfully it has, and the structure is stable.
Okay, so I think that's it. We don't have any more questions.
Okay.
So we would like to thank you again. It's a great opportunity for us to hear architects from other countries telling us about their work, something we don't have much contact with, so it's really cool.
Yeah, I always look at the architecture in Brazil because you are the masters of concrete. Nobody does that better than you guys.
Yeah.
And I feel quite envious sometimes because you don't have to insulate everything.
Yeah.
You just leave the concrete beautiful on both sides, which is a privilege that we cannot allow ourselves here. So one day coming to Brazil to look at your architecture, that would be a dream.
Yeah, it would be cool.
You're very welcome.
Well, thank you.
So I think that's it. Maris, quer terminar? Fala alguma coisa?
Acho que não, só dar os avisos finais aí para a galera se inscrever ainda na palestra, preencher o forms, e a próxima palestra será às 2h da tarde, pessoal. Acho que é isso.
Ok. Você pode parar, Maria, a gravação?